Captain Jake Morrison had elevated napping to an art form. Not just any art form, mind you, but the kind that gets displayed in fancy galleries with pretentious little plaques. The kind that makes critics stroke their beards and mutter about the human condition. Except Jake's human condition was perpetual exhaustion, and his masterpiece was a daily 3-hour power nap that had become the stuff of galactic legend. The Lazy Susan drifted through hyperspace with all the urgency of a particularly unmotivated sloth. She wasn't much to look at. This ship. Think of a shipping container that someone had welded engines to after a few too many drinks, and you'd be in the ballpark. But she was home to the most diverse crew of misfits this side of the Andromeda galaxy. Captain Jake is entering his sacred nap time, announced Quiex, the ship's Zentorian navigator, with the reverence usually reserved for religious ceremonies. Quiex looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with an overexcited golden retriever, complete with 4 arms that gestured wildly whenever he spoke, which was always. All crew members are reminded that disturbing the captain during his rest period is punishable by spacing, disintegration, or worse, having to listen to his motivational speeches about proper sleep hygiene. Blorg, the ship's engineer, whimpered from his position near the engine controls. Picture a giant slug wearing a hard hat and anxiety like a security blanket, and you've got Blorg. His species, the mollusks, were naturally nervous creatures, but working with humans had elevated his stress levels to new and creative heights. But what if something goes wrong with the hyperdrive? What if we need to make a course correction? What if the universe implodes and we need his authorization to evacuate? Then we die quietly. Vex, the ship's AI, interjected with digital disdain. Vex had been programmed with what the manufacturer generously called a personality, though most beings agreed it was more like weaponized sarcasm wrapped in code. I've run the calculations. The probability of the captain being pleasant when awakened prematurely is approximately 0.0000001%. And that's only if the ship is actively exploding. Jake shuffled past the bridge in his lucky pajamas, the ones with little spaceships on them that his sister had given him for his birthday. His hair stuck up at angles that defied both gravity and good sense, and his eyes had that glazed look of someone who'd been running on caffeine and spite for the better part of 3 decades. Cargo delivery to the Fluffians, he mumbled, waving vaguely at a data pad. A milk run. Easy money. Wake me when we get there, or don't. I trust you people about as far as I can throw you, which in zero gravity is technically infinite, so there's that. The Fluffians were exactly what their name suggested. A species that looked like someone had crossed teddy bears with cotton candy and given them the collective personality of a children's librarian. They were peaceful, friendly, and had never met a conflict they couldn't resolve with group hugs and herbal tea. Their biggest export was comfort food and motivational posters. Their biggest import was literally everything else, because being that relentlessly positive apparently didn't leave much time for manufacturing. The cargo manifest shows we're delivering Earth chocolate, Martian coffee, and something called stress balls, Cree read from his station. I still don't understand why the Fluffians need stress balls. Have you ever tried being that happy all the time? Vex replied. It's exhausting. Even for them. Jake paused at his quarters entrance, fixed his crew with a look that could have melted hull plating, and delivered his daily reminder. 3 hours. Not 2 hours and 59 minutes, not 3 hours and 1 minute. 3 hours. The next person who wakes me early gets to explain to the insurance company why our ship mysteriously developed a Jake-shaped hole in the airlock. The Drakmarian battle fleet emerged from hyperspace with all the subtlety of a heavy metal concert in a library. Their ships were the kind of intimidating black wedges that screamed we take ourselves very seriously and have probably never heard of fun. They bristled with more weapons than a paranoid arms dealer's fever dream. Admiral Skarr stood on the bridge of his flagship, the harbinger of doom, because apparently the Drakmarians had never met a melodramatic name they didn't like. Skarr himself looked like someone had taken a rhinoceros, taught it to walk upright, and then given it a really bad attitude and a collection of ceremonial scars. He was reviewing intelligence reports about human cargo vessels when his tactical officer announced they'd found one. Sir, we've detected a human freight ship, the Lazy Susan. Minimal armament, crew of 4 including 1 human. Perfect, Skarr growled. his voice like gravel in a blender. "We'll board them, confiscate their cargo, and make an example. The other species need to remember that the Drakmarian Empire doesn't tolerate trespassers in our territory." What Admiral Skarr didn't know, because the Drakmarian intelligence network was about as reliable as a chocolate teapot, it was that they were violating the single most important rule in the Galactic Handbook: never, under any circumstances, wake a sleeping human. On the Lazy Susan, proximity alarms started wailing like banshees with separation anxiety. Creaks's four arms flailed in different directions as he checked sensors, navigation, and his own pulse simultaneously. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," he chanted, which was his species' traditional response to danger. "Drakmarian battle fleet, 15 ships, all weapons hot. They're hailing us with what I can only describe as aggressive intent." The Blorg oozed closer to the nearest hiding spot, which happened to be a supply closet. "What do we do? Do we wake Captain Jake? Do we surrender? Do we fake our deaths? I'm good at playing dead. It's a natural mollusk defense mechanism." "We absolutely do not wake Captain Jake," Vex declared with the authority of someone who'd calculated the odds. According to galactic behavioral databases, disturbing a human's sleep cycle results in what they call being grumpy. The files suggest this is a mild translation. The actual human term involves language that would make a Drakmarian pirate blush. The ship shuddered as the Drakmarian boarding tubes attached with all the finesse of a drunken elephant. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridors as armed soldiers made their way to the bridge. "Remember," Creaks whispered frantically, "whatever happens, we keep them away from Jake's quarters. The captain needs his 3 hours. It's been 47 minutes. We have 2 hours and 13 minutes to resolve this situation peacefully." Admiral Skarr strode onto the bridge with the confidence of someone who'd never met a problem he couldn't solve with superior firepower. He was flanked by a dozen soldiers wearing armor that looked like it had been designed by someone with serious anger management issues. "I am Admiral Skarr of the Drakmarian Empire," he announced, as if anyone within 3-star systems could have missed that fact. "You are trespassing in our territory. Surrender your cargo and prepare to be boarded." "Actually," Creak said, his voice climbing several octaves, "you already boarded us. You're standing on our bridge right now. So technically the boarding part is complete." Skarr's expression suggested he wasn't in the mood for technical accuracy. "Where is your human captain? I want to speak with him immediately." "He's indisposed." Blorg squeaked from behind a console. "Very indisposed." "Extremely indisposed. You might say he's in a state of advanced indisposition." "He's napping," Vex added helpfully. "And before you ask, no, we're not waking him. The last time someone interrupted his sleep, the cleanup crew found pieces of the offender in 17 different star systems." Admiral Skarr laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "You expect me to believe that one human poses a threat to the Drakmarian Empire?" The alien crew exchanged looks that could best be described as, "Oh, you sweet, innocent fool." Private Thunk was not the brightest star in the Drakmarian constellation. In fact, he was more like a burned-out bulb in a string of Christmas lights. Which is why, despite explicit orders to secure the ship quietly, he managed to trip over his own feet while investigating what he thought was a weapons locker, but was actually Captain Jake's quarters. The crash was spectacular. Thunk went down like a sack of hammers, his armor clanging against the bulkhead, his weapon discharging into the ceiling, and his dignity fleeing to another galaxy entirely. The noise echoed through the ship like the universe's most unwelcome alarm clock. On the bridge, everyone froze. Even Admiral Skarr stopped mid-threat, his tactical brain suddenly registering that something had gone very, very wrong. "What was that?" he demanded. "That," Vex said with digital resignation, "was the sound of your soldier just waking up the most dangerous predator in known space." Jake Morrison emerged from his quarters, like a hurricane wearing boxer shorts. His hair defied at least 3 laws of physics, his eyes held the kind of fury usually reserved for natural disasters, and his entire demeanor suggested that someone was about to have a very bad day. "Who," he said, and the word came out like a death sentence, "woke me up." The Drakmarian boarding party had heard stories about humans. Every species in the galaxy had heard the stories. Humans were the ones who'd looked at the food chain and decided they belonged at the top. Humans were the ones who'd taken one look at space, the vast, cold, deadly void that killed everything else, and thought, hey, this looks like a fun place to hang out. But the stories hadn't prepared them for this. Standing before them was a creature in polka-dot underwear, holding what appeared to be a coffee mug shaped like a cat, looking like he'd been hit by lightning and was ready to return the favor. Private Thunk, still tangled in debris, whimpered something that might have been an apology. Jake's gaze swept the bridge, taking in the armed soldiers, his cowering crew, and Admiral Skarr, who was trying very hard to maintain his intimidating posture despite the growing certainty that he'd made a terrible mistake. Let me get this straight, Jake said, his voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded Category 5 hurricanes. You people decided to board my ship, terrorize my crew, and interrupt my constitutionally guaranteed afternoon nap because you think you're tough? Krieks found his voice first. Captain Jake, we tried to handle the situation without disturbing you, but they weren't having it, Jake finished, his attention focusing on Admiral Skarr like a targeting system. And you are? I am Admiral Skarr of the Drakmarian. I don't care if you're the Emperor of the Toenail Clipping Federation, Jake interrupted. You woke me up during my nap. Do you have any idea what you've done? The temperature on the bridge seemed to drop several degrees. Even the ship's environmental systems appeared to be holding their breath. I've heard about human sleep patterns, Admiral Skarr said, trying to regain control of the situation. But I find it hard to believe that one tired human could pose a threat to my entire fleet. Jake's smile was the kind that sharks would have admired. Admiral, you just became part of a very exclusive club. Congratulations. You're about to learn why every sentient species in the galaxy has a standing rule about not disturbing human nap time. Jake scratched his stomach, yawned, and looked around the bridge with the casual interest of someone deciding what to have for breakfast. The fact that he was surrounded by armed aliens in power armor seemed to concern him about as much as a light drizzle. So, he said conversationally, let me understand the situation here. You've got what, 15 ships? All armed to the teeth, I'm assuming. Probably a crew of, 3,000? 4,000? And you thought it would be a good idea to wake me up from my nap to steal my cargo. Admiral Skarr's confidence was beginning to develop hairline cracks. Your cargo is forfeit under Drakmarian law. Surrender it peacefully, and we'll consider sparing your lives. Jake nodded thoughtfully, then walked over to the coffee maker. It was an ancient, battered thing that looked like it had been welded together by someone with a drinking problem. But it made coffee that could wake the dead and occasionally did. Coffee, anyone? He asked politely. No, just me then. He poured himself a cup, added sugar with the deliberate care of someone performing brain surgery, and took a sip. Admiral, I'm going to give you one chance to explain to me why I shouldn't turn your entire fleet into scrap metal and bad memories. The Drakmarian soldiers shifted nervously. Their training hadn't covered this scenario. The manual said humans were supposed to be intimidated by superior firepower, not offer them refreshments. You're one human, Skarr said, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. Against 15 warships. Math was never my strong suit, Jake admitted, pulling a wrench from a nearby toolkit and examining it with professional interest. But I'm pretty sure 15 is more than one. Of course, that's assuming your ships are still functional after I'm done with them. He hefted the wrench experimentally. It was a perfectly ordinary maintenance tool, the kind you'd use to tighten bolts or adjust fittings. In Jake's hands, it somehow looked like an instrument of mass destruction. Captain, Krieks whispered. Perhaps we should discuss this rationally. Oh, we're way past rational, Jake replied cheerfully. We're well into the territory of what my grandmother used to call natural consequences. Admiral Skarr here decided to interrupt my sleep. Now he gets to learn why that was a bad decision. Jake took another sip of coffee, then casually tossed the wrench in the air and caught it. The sound it made hitting his palm was like a gunshot in the silence. Private Thunk, isn't it? Jake said to the soldier still untangling himself from the debris. You're the one who woke me up. Tell me, did your commanding officers brief you on human behavior patterns before you came aboard? Thunk made a sound like a deflating balloon. I'll take that as a no, Jake continued. Well, here's your first lesson in Human Studies 101. We don't like being woken up. It makes us what we call cranky. Some species translate this as mildly annoyed. That's adorable, but completely wrong when a human is cranky. It means we're approximately 10 seconds away from showing you why your species should have stayed home. He walked over to Private Thunk, who was now trying to become one with the floor plating. Nothing personal, soldier, but you're about to become a teaching moment. Jake grabbed Thunk by his armor and lifted him effortlessly. The soldier probably weighed twice what Jake did, but humans had this inconvenient habit of ignoring physics when they were properly motivated. "Admiral," Jake called out, still holding Thunk like he was examining a particularly interesting specimen, "I'm going to count to 3. If your people aren't off my ship by then, I'm going to demonstrate why humans are considered the galaxy's apex predators." "You're bluffing," Skarr said, but he was backing toward the airlock. 1, Jake said pleasantly. "This is ridiculous." 2. Admiral Skarr looked around at his soldiers, who were suddenly finding the floor very interesting. "And 3, Jake said. Then he smiled. What happened next would go down in galactic history as the pajama incident, or, in more academic circles, why Admiral Skarr retired early and opened a flower shop. Jake gently set Private Thunk down, patted him on the head like a confused puppy, and announced, "I'll be right back. Try not to touch anything while I'm gone." He walked to his quarters, emerged 30 seconds later wearing fuzzy slippers and a bathrobe that read "World's Okayest Captain," and headed for the airlock. "Where are you going?" Trerex called out, his voice climbing into ranges that only dogs and Centaurians could hear. "I'm going to return their visit," Jake replied, as if this were the most reasonable thing in the universe. "It's only polite." "Peep." But Captain Blorg squeaked. "They have 15 warships, and armor, and weapons that could vaporize small moons. And I have a severe caffeine deficiency and approximately 2 hours of missed sleep," Jake countered. "I'd say we're about even." He cycled through the airlock, crossed the boarding tube connecting the ships, and knocked politely on the harbinger of doom's interference service. He called out cheerfully. On the bridge of the Lazy Susan, the crew watched their sensors in horrified fascination. "He's aboard their flagship," Vex reported with digital disbelief. Life signs indicate he's moving through the ship at a leisurely pace. "Wait, correction." He stopped. "I believe he's asking for directions." The Drakmarian fleet was in chaos. News of the incident had spread through their communication channels faster than gossip at a high school reunion. Ship captains were frantically consulting their databases for information about human behavioral patterns, particularly the section labeled "What to do when you've accidentally angered one." The answer, according to every reliable source, was simple: run. But Admiral Skarr was made of sterner stuff. He'd built his career on intimidation and superior firepower. He wasn't about to be deterred by one human in sleepwear. No matter how many stories he'd heard, "All ships, maintain position," he ordered. One human cannot threaten an entire battle fleet. On his flagship, alarms were starting to sound, minor ones at first, then increasingly urgent ones as Jake made his way through the ship. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the human has disabled our primary weapons array." "How?" "He appears to have unplugged it." "Unplugged it?" "Yes, sir. There's a note attached that says finders keepers, Admiral Grumpy." Jake's voice echoed through the ship's intercom system. "Admiral Skarr to the bridge, please. Admiral Skarr to the bridge. We need to have a little chat about personal boundaries and the importance of a good afternoon nap." "Sir," another officer reported, "he's also disabled our engine systems, life support backups, and somehow managed to reprogram our coffee machines to only dispense decaf. The last part hit Admiral Skarr where it hurt most. The Drakmarians took their coffee very seriously." "How is this possible?" Skarr demanded. His chief engineer, a being who looked like he'd been assembled from spare mechanical parts and anxiety, consulted his readings. According to the ship's logs, he's using standard maintenance tools and what appears to be an extensive knowledge of universal ship design principles. Also, he keeps humming something called the wheels on the bus. Jake appeared on the bridge like a supernatural force of nature wearing fuzzy slippers. He was carrying a toolkit that looked like it had been purchased at a discount hardware store, and his hair was somehow even more disheveled than before. "Admiral," he said brightly. "There you are. We need to talk." Skarr's personal guard raised their weapons, which Jake ignored with the casual indifference of someone swatting at flies. "Here's the thing," Jake continued, settling into the Admiral's chair without invitation. "I'm having what my therapist would call a bad day. You woke me up. You threatened my crew. And worst of all, you interrupted the best dream I've had in months. I was finally beating my high score in galactic solitaire. This is my ship." Skarr protested. "It was your ship," Jake corrected. "Past tense. As of approximately 5 minutes ago, when I disabled your entire fleet's weapons systems, it became my ship. Along with the other 14 ships you brought to this little party. Throughout the Drakmarian fleet, crews were discovering that their most sophisticated military hardware had been reduced to the technological equivalent of very expensive paperweights. Surrender," Jake said simply, "or I start getting creative with these tools, and trust me, you don't want to see me get creative when I'm running on 2 hours of sleep and pure spite." Admiral Skarr's surrender was swift, decisive, and accompanied by what could only be described as whimpering. The mighty Drakmarian battle fleet, terror of 3 sectors and the subject of countless military academies' case studies, he had been defeated by one human in his pajamas who just wanted to finish his nap. Jake yawned, stretched, and looked around the harbinger of doom's bridge with the satisfaction of someone who'd completed a particularly tedious household chore. "Right then," he said, handing Admiral Skarr a business card that read Morrison Interstellar Freight. "We deliver anywhere, anytime, but please don't wake the captain. Here's how this is going to work. You're going to take your fleet, jump to the nearest star system, and think very carefully about your life choices. You're also going to spread the word that human nap time is sacred, and violating it carries a penalty of having your entire military reduced to scrap metal by a guy in fuzzy slippers." "What about our ships?" Skarr asked weakly. "They'll work fine," Jake assured him. "In about 6 hours, when I've had my nap and feel like reactivating your systems. Until then, enjoy the peace and quiet. I've set your life support to play soothing nature sounds. You're welcome." Jake made his way back to the Lazy Susan, where his crew was waiting with expressions that ranged from awe to terror to the kind of respect usually reserved for natural disasters. Captain Kriek said carefully, "What exactly did you do over there?" "Basic maintenance," Jake replied, settling back into his favorite chair. "Amazing what you can accomplish with the right tools and sufficient motivation." "Vex, make a note in the ship's log. Drakmarian battle fleet successfully negotiated with using standard diplomatic protocols." "By diplomatic protocols, you mean terrorizing them into submission while wearing sleepwear?" Vex inquired. "I prefer to think of it as aggressive conflict resolution," Jake said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have approximately 2 hours and 37 minutes of nap time to make up for." He padded off to his quarters, pausing only to add, "Oh, and establish a 50-meter no-approach zone around my cabin. At least signs. Maybe add some of those yellow caution tape things to make it official." As Jake disappeared into his quarters, Creeks busied himself updating the galactic database with new information about human behavioral patterns. The entry, which would eventually become required reading at every military academy in known space, read, "Warning, under no circumstances should human sleep patterns be interrupted. Humans experiencing sleep deprivation exhibit behaviors that previous databases have inadequately described as grumpy. More accurate terms include extensionally terrifying, capable of disabling entire fleets using household tools, and surprisingly effective in fuzzy slippers. Recommended response to encountering a sleep-deprived human, immediate retreat to a safe distance, measured in light years." Blorg had retreated to his engine room, where he was composing what appeared to be either a resignation letter or a love song dedicated to Jake's conflict resolution skills. It was hard to tell with mollusks. "Vex," Kriek called out, "how did Captain Jake disable 15 heavily armed warships using nothing but maintenance tools?" "According to my analysis," Vex replied, "he didn't actually disable them so much as convince them they were disabled. He unplugged a few non-essential systems, left some threatening notes, and allowed their own panic to do the rest. The psychological impact of being outmaneuvered by someone in pajamas apparently cannot be calculated using standard mathematical models. So he bluffed. He bluffed using the kind of confidence that comes from being absolutely certain that he could follow through on his threats if necessary," Vex clarified. "There's a difference. Also, he actually did reprogram all their coffee machines to dispense decaf, which, according to my cultural databases, is considered a war crime in 17 systems. From his quarters came the sound of Jake settling into his bunk, followed by contented snoring that somehow managed to sound threatening. "Make another note," Curix told Vex. "New ship policy. Anyone who disturbs Captain Jake's nap will be personally delivered to Admiral Skarr as a peace offering." "Noted," Vex replied. "Though I should point out that after today's events, Admiral Skarr has reportedly retired from military service and opened a small tea shop on a peaceful agricultural world. His business slogan is tranquil beverages for troubled souls." The Lazy Susan continued on its course toward the Fluffian homeworld, its cargo hold full of chocolate, coffee and stress balls, its crew traumatized but oddly proud, and its captain finally getting the nap he deserved. In the years that followed, the story of the pajama incident would be told in bars and academies across the galaxy. It became the subject of military textbooks, doctoral dissertations, and at least one interpretive dance performance. But the most important lesson remained constant: never, under any circumstances, wake a human mid-nap. The universe is a big, dangerous place, but nothing in it is more terrifying than a sleepy human who's had their rest interrupted. Jake Morrison slept peacefully for the next 2 hours and 37 minutes, dreaming of high scores in galactic solitaire and the satisfying sound of Admiral Skarr's surrender. And across the galaxy, alien species slept a little more soundly, knowing that somewhere out there, a tired human in fuzzy slippers was keeping the peace, one nap at a time.